Hello, welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental enthusiasts, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Laura and I discuss applying to senior positions. We talk to Anita Raman about climate careers, riding across the country, and mindfulness. And finally, Laura, do you know what the closest planet to Earth is?
Oh my God. Flashbacks to middle school. The closest planet is Venus.
So this is the one that can be closest.
Wait, there's a story.
There's a trick to this. So what's the planet that's closest most of the time? Because, you know, our orbits they're all moving, They're all changing. So what is the planet that's closest to Earth most of the time?
The moon. I'm just kidding.
Oh, that's so great.
Let's see. Process of elimination. I know it's not Pluto. I know it's not Saturn. Uranus? I have no idea, obviously.
Now I feel like all you're doing is making jokes.
There's a song
no, there's a trick to it. It's all a trick. This is all a trick question. And I set you up for failure. Did I do it on purpose? Yes, absolutely. But the planet that's closest to Earth most of the time is Mercury. And the reason why is because Mercury has a really short orbit. So it's just nearer to Earth most of the time because the other planets have longer, wider orbits. And so they're not as close all the time. So Venus gets the closest.
I didn't even think about Mercury. It's like,
I know, no one ever does. So, okay. All right. One last question. What's the closest planet to every other planet? So if I said, what's the closest planet to Mars most of the time? What's the closest planet to Jupiter most of the time? What's the closest planet to Saturn most of the time? Guess what the answer is?
Earth.
It's still Mercury because it's ridiculous orbit.
Second choice.
So I found that out this week and I'm like, I have got to tell someone.
Okay. So am I smarter than a fifth grader? No.
I mean, I didn't get it either. I had no idea. All right. Hit that music
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our podcast partner, ACRA, is hosting a webinar called Do's and Don'ts of Subcontracting on Federal Projects on April 12th. Check it out at info.acra-crm.org. And fantastic news, everyone. EPR is doing an AMA sponsored by STV on Tuesday, April 11th. You may have previously heard Wednesday, April 12th, but we changed it. It is now Tuesday, April 11th at 8 p.m. on our YouTube channel that you can find at EPR Podcast from YouTube. And Nic and I will be available for you to ask us about career advice, your favorite pizza toppings, movies, or anything else on your mind. So mark your calendars and we hope to see you there. Now we have a sponsor for our AMA. We need a sponsor for some episodes. So this one we do not. Nic, are you ready for our 30-second sponsor challenge?
Yes, I think so.
Didn't you?
No, I got it. All right, you give me the start and I'll go.
Ready, go.
All right, everyone. Today I have another fantastic, wonderful product. We talked earlier about how we have bikes and they can get stolen, right? Yeah, well, not anymore. With Bikes on Fire, your bike will never, ever be stolen again. Once you park it, you push this one button, it will burst into flames. That's right. The entire thing will melt to the ground. And absolutely no one, I guarantee you, no one will steal that bike. And if you call now, within the next 30 seconds, we will offer a free fire extinguisher to put it out. How about that?
Awesome.
Bikes on Fire.
Love it. Let me go get mine now. All right, let's get to our segment.
I think we've said this on the show a couple of times, but it still keeps happening where people don't believe in themselves, so they don't apply for things that are above their current, roles and responsibilities or whatever, even where they don't even think that they have the roles and responsibilities, the tools required to do the job anyway. And it's maddening because it's like, you want people that are confident for sure. So you people that do believe it, and you definitely don't want people who are ill-equipped to do the job. But how do we get people to let go of that perception? Oh, this job's not for me. It's too high. How do we do that? Because it's making me crazy.
That they don't believe in themselves, but they don't want to set themselves up for failure, essentially. So I think a lot of them are afraid to put themselves out there and then feel like an idiot in the interview, or even worse, on the job. And then they also don't want to lie. I don't know if this is just they're afraid that if they submit to something and they don't have 5 years. So I keep telling them, a lot of the people that I'm working with for their careers are adults. They've been working, and it says 5 years of experience. And they're like, I don't have 5 years of experience in NEPA, or I don't have 5 years of experience. I'm like, well, you have 5 years of working professional adult experience in life and certain things. So you really have to see if that works, like maybe it's okay and then let them weed you out. If you're going to apply for it, let Nic say the experience you think you're bringing to the table isn't right.
Yeah. Yeah. I would totally agree. That's the thing that is so frustrating. It's like, what does it say? You miss every shot you don't take, and just, if you're looking for a job, don't be afraid of that. Cause it's one of those things it's really my job to sort through and say yes or no. And, we've talked a little bit about like when you're applying for jobs that if you don't have something relevant, then you have to find a way to make it relevant. That is important. If you're just like, I don't know why we're picking on baristas, but I had that come through. Like someone was like, I'm a barista. And I'm like, what else? Like I'm not going to spend the time, energy, and effort to figure out if this person really has the qualifications because they didn't take the time, energy, and effort to put it in their resume. But if you have environmental background, even if you have some modicum of experience, like I've hired people that I know are great writers. The reason I hired them is because they're great writers, not because they knew how to do environmental work. That's like, to me, the most important thing is, being able to, being fundamentally decent and being able to write. Like those are really, really important for me. And like the rest of the stuff you can learn, even if you're a little bit behind on certain things, that's a challenge. I think the tricky part is like, if we put sales goals to something, I know that scares a lot of people too. Where it's like, we want you to help bring in work. And then everyone's like, whoa.
Sales skills are going to be like, what? I can't do that. Nobody knows how to do sales.
Yeah. And so maybe that's where we take the conversation right now. Like one of those things that people are like, I don't know how to sell anything. I'm like, you get people to do stuff for you all the time, right? Yes, you've done that. Okay, well then this is kind of like that, but it's just, it's just a little focused on one thing. It's just, I feel like a lot of times we think of salespeople as like, hey guy, how's it going? How the kids? All right, whoop whoop, like the used car salesman. And most of the time it's the opposite of that, where it's just kind of like, hey, it's good to see you again. Oh my gosh, we've had so much fun working together with you. Do you have anything else coming up? You do? Awesome. We love working with you. Let's do it. And we have clients like that too. Like that's the easy thing. And sometimes it just, it's an opt-out opportunity that pops up. But then all you have to be is, again, that fundamentally decent thing. If you're a good person, people like you, they're going to want to work with you more. And it's almost like you're not selling, you're just being yourself, working. And that helps bring in work. And sometimes I think we get lost in that. Where it has to be.
I think, if you look at like Xerox has one of the best sales, or had one of the best sales training programs. A lot of their stuff is just about making sure people understand what Xerox does, what solutions they actually have. And then you just listen to people, ask them questions, and then offer them the solutions that you have to those problems.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
When they come to work for you, that they don't need to understand every single thing that Dawson does when they walk in the door. You're going to tell them, you're going to teach them that.
Yeah, exactly. And it takes time. There's always an expectation that you learn and then grow. You don't just like start off flying off. Like there's definitely ways you can set yourself up for success, but yeah, all of those positions take time, energy, and effort to learn. You're always a little blind when you take a new job.
I know at least one employer who's in adjusting their job descriptions to talk about what the job is instead of saying this is what you need to know or this is what is required. It talks more about like, what are you going to do in this? What does the day-to-day look like? What skills are you going to use? And then let the person who's applying determine whether they have those skills or have done them in the past, and saying like, instead of saying, NEPA is required. And then people are going, I've never even heard of it.
Yeah. There's a balance too, though, because there's, at this point, for some of the jobs we have, like, I do want that person that has some NEPA, because like there's some baseline I don't want to teach. Like, I don't want to teach, this is an EA, for example. How do we find a balance between that? Like, I don't necessarily need someone to be a NEPA expert.
Right.
The biggest,
what
greatest
level,
thing.
let's, of course, senior is different than entry level or junior. But if you, for that one position you were talking about earlier, what do you expect them to have? Because this is one thing they don't know. Do I need to have actually done the work? Can I have taken a certification course? Can I have read a book? Like, what do they need to know before they are qualified to have an interview, not even get the job?
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things like, like it says NEPA, the biggest thing that I need is someone who understands environmental policy, right? Does it have to be necessarily NEPA? No. Like if you understand how the regulatory process works, if you work in permitting, for example, you have at least a basic understanding of the process that's required. You understand technical writing. You understand the nuances of working with clients, right? That's really the more important thing than necessarily straight up, I know everything there is to know about NEPA. That's great. But like I say, we've talked about on the show all the time, there's people that do the things that are really, they're similar but completely different, And, the skill sets for permitting are really similar to the skill sets for NEPA, for example. Like that's a good allegory. I think both of those have similar needs, and that's a lot easier and a lot better. Like I would absolutely interview people like that who are like, well, I've worked in the permitting industry for a long time. I'm like, oh, that's great. And there's a new potential revenue stream, right? Permitting, which we do some of, but we could always do more. And I can have somebody help on the NEPA side of things. Then, it's even better than just straight up NEPA.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I'm always telling people, you don't know what weird, crazy other talent you have that you're bringing that they might find valuable. And you didn't, Again, you're thinking, oh, this experience I have doing this thing doesn't have any like coding or something like that. It plays no role, but maybe Nic is trying to build an app for his program and you're like the person who knows how to talk about things. And so, you just don't know. So people just need to stop self-disqualifying themselves really and just take the chance.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. Don't self-disqualify. That's a good way to put it.
All right. So you're going to have a flood of applications tomorrow, as is everyone else. Everyone listening is going to go submit an application somewhere.
There we go.
And,
good. I would be happy with that.
Yeah. Let's get to our interview. Welcome back to EPR. Today we have Anita Raman, Research and Policy Development Associate at the Cornell Climate Jobs Institute on the show. Welcome, Anita.
Hi, so nice to be here.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became interested in environmental policy and research?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm a Research and Policy Development Associate, and I work at the Cornell Climate Jobs Institute. And we are housed within the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell. And I should say we also just became an institute like 2 weeks ago. We were an initiative within the school, and now we're our own institute. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about this morning, actually, kind of like what's been this thread throughout my career. And I've been thinking about how we have these enormous like challenges and opportunities ahead. So one challenge being that we have to completely change our economy to become a clean energy economy. And that two, that we have to adjust to this new climate normal. And we have to make sure that the most vulnerable people have the resources that they need to adapt to this changing climate and environment. And so it kind of occurred to me that this question I've been trying to answer is this a just transition or is this just a transition? Mm-hmm. Like, how are we actually approaching these enormous challenges that we have ahead? I've been looking at both of these aspects of it, the adaptation part of it. So making sure that people have the resources that they need to actually adapt to climate change, but also making sure that as we transition, we're doing it in a way that provides access to high quality climate jobs, especially for the people who are most impacted by climate change.
What made you decide to what was your first degree and how did you decide to go after that?
Sure. So my first degree was in environmental science, and I'm not going to generalize, but at least my family was very insistent that I go into medicine and become a doctor. And at the time I just started to learn about climate change in college. And I was thinking, if we have no planet left, there will be no one left to heal. Mm-hmm. And so this seems like a different kind of healing that I need to work, that I personally feel like I want to work on, is like healing the planet and making sure that we are protecting each other and protecting species and protecting the planet from anthropogenic climate change. So that's kind of how I entered this environmental science field. And it was so new at the time that I was one of the first graduating classes at UCLA. And it was a little bit scary because it was so new. And I think it was just like kind of becoming something where people were starting to use the word like sustainability, and people just kind of started talking about green jobs. And there was still this fear that people were going to like think of you as like category, put you in a box because you're in environmental science, like a lot of like hippie language kind of being thrown around. And it's like, you want to be taken seriously and you want to be, especially as a scientist, like you want it to be clear that this is coming from a place of science and data and evidence. So there was definitely like a bit of fear of kind of owning the field, owning the story, owning even the interest in this. From there, I became really interested in global environmental issues and already seeing this kind of inequity in who's experiencing the worst effects of climate change, who's causing the worst effects of climate change. And that kind of led me in a direction of international development. So I worked at the State Department for a couple of years in a program in like the Science and Technology Office to help kind of facilitate best practices between the US and other countries. So understanding, what's working in various different countries to mitigate climate change. What are we doing and how can we learn from each other? Mm-hmm. And I kind of got deeper and deeper into this. And I was like, just really excited about the opportunities for countries to collaborate because this was such a huge, enormous problem that needs to be solved at the country level. And that led me to graduate school. And then I had this dream that I really wanted to work at the UN and I really wanted to be part of this Paris Climate Agreement, like conversation. And I wanted to help facilitate this. And so I ended up there in 2015 and I was in like the Secretary General's climate change support team. And it was really exciting because I was part of this initiative to help countries of the global South create partnerships to help them address climate change. So there's so much knowledge, indigenous knowledge and expertise and local solutions between and among countries of the global South. And it was a partnership to help facilitate that kind of exchange. I worked on setting up a partnership, the Southern Climate Partnership Incubator, and then I worked on some research there. I read every single nationally determined contribution. It's basically the report that every country puts out on how they're going to like mitigate and adapt to climate change. And I did a bunch of research on how all of these countries can achieve these different goals and what are basically the priorities that they have.
How did you get a job at the UN? I know a lot of people are like, would love to know.
Okay, well, it started with an internship. And so that seemed to be the best way to get my foot in the door. It is very, very difficult to get in, especially in New York City. So I think definitely, going to graduate school in New York City and like the relationships between Columbia and like in the UN definitely helped. I would say that I do know a lot of people who've gotten like jobs and internships at the UN in different countries. And they've also had different, like very different and also fulfilling like internships and jobs there too. And I think that's also a really good option. And
I mean, I don't know. Actually, I have a curiosity question for you. Like based on like you talked about like family dynamics, right? Like your family wanted you to be a doctor. And I remember you're right about like the perception of environmental professionals. I remember like buying my first car. Like for me personally, I said I was an environmental scientist and they're like, oh, well, here are our Priuses. And I was like, okay, well, that's great. Thank you. Well, one, I can't afford that. And two, thanks for putting me in a box, but was your family, like when you decide to do this, right? I don't want to be a medical doctor. I want to do this environmental thing. Was that a supportive atmosphere for you or was it a little more challenging?
It was a little of both from different parts of my family, but it was mostly challenging because I'm a first generation American and this was also a totally new field. And so the avenues that I were pursuing were just so unfamiliar. And so there was this real pressure to kind of do what we know works, like follow the paths that we know can lead to success instead of exploring this new territory that we don't know where it's going to go. We don't know how many jobs it's going to create. We don't know the quality of those new jobs. We don't know if you're going to be like, there was just so much job insecurity. And then at the same time, there was the housing crisis. And that's around the time that I graduated. And so it was really scary for my family. And I think I was definitely feeling a lot of that pressure. I'm really happy now to see that there are a lot more environmental programs and there are a lot more people and there are podcasts like this to kind of expose people to the number of options that they have in this field, because there's so many and we need so many people. And I wish I had heard that message like more when I was younger, that, this is extremely important and there are groups of people there to support you. as you embrace this path and figure out where you fit.
Hell yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah,
like you alluded to, that the climate change didn't become real until recently. And we were just noticing the other day that Fox News actually was talking about the problems of climate change. So even in these like areas where they used to not even acknowledge it, they're starting to acknowledge it. So you're absolutely right, though. But around the time you graduated, it was still kind of like it was just crossing that tipping point where more people were starting to say, oh, yeah, this is an actual thing than the opposite.
Do you remember the time when they used to have like one climate denier scientist and then like one climate scientist, and then they would have them like talking about it because they felt they needed like two perspectives? Like, yeah, that was a difficult.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to hear that. That they're actually kind of embracing this in the way that, they should. And I can talk a little bit more about that in my work too.
I feel like, especially from like Cornell, you just said that this is now like an actual program for you. So not only we're talking about climate change is real, but now climate jobs is a real thing. Maybe give us a little description of like maybe how Cornell defines it, or just in general, like what is a climate job? Because we talk about environmental professionals. That's usually anyone who has like a green degree of some kind. I even have, as a career coach, people approach me with like, I'm looking for a climate job. How would you sort of describe or define that?
Yes, that is the question. So there's a focus that we generally have when we talk about climate jobs. And I think that oftentimes, like especially in the environmental field, we talk about how it's important to decarbonize as soon, as quickly as possible, at whatever cost, no matter what, like just get it done. And I think that sometimes there's a little bit less thought given to how are we doing this? Like, and who are the people who are going to be most affected by this transition? And so when we think about climate jobs, we think about high quality jobs. Right. And so we work to achieve 3 goals. So to reduce emissions, tackling the climate crisis, creating high quality jobs, and then building a diverse and inclusive workforce. Mm-hmm. And this high quality jobs is the most important thing that I think we need to really think about when we're thinking about a just transition. So, for example, I will tell you that I come from a place I grew up in a place that was mostly fossil fuel driven. The biggest economic contributor was oil. And many of my friends and like their parents worked in oil refinery jobs. And these were good union jobs with pensions and with health insurance, with good benefits that provided for the whole community. These were community sustaining high quality jobs.
Yeah.
And the taxes from the industry paid for my schools, paid for our hospitals, paid for our libraries. And so how are we going to make sure that the jobs that people are transitioning to are good jobs? And what we're learning and what we're studying right now is like, what is the quality of these new jobs that are being created? We want to make sure that as we do this transition, that these are going to be high quality, family sustaining, community sustaining jobs, and that people have good jobs to transition to. And so what we do is we work with union coalitions in different states to help them develop a proactive climate agenda that is worker centered. And I think for a long time, there's been this argument about like economy versus environment. And there's been this tension even between environmentalists and unions, where unions are trying to protect their membership, like in fossil fuel jobs too, because these are, again, high quality jobs. And environmentalists are trying to just transition as quickly as possible. And so it's kind of changing the conversation where we're thinking about what are the new high quality union jobs that could be created in these new clean energy fields, and how can we make sure that there are labor standards on these new jobs, and how can we make sure that they're family sustaining. And so, for example, our work started in New York after Hurricane Sandy, when it was kind of a wake up call for New York, just by the effect that it had on entire communities, but also unions. And it was a wake-up call, and it was in the sense that Cornell brought together a group of New York unions to have a conversation about like, what are we going to do now? Like, the writing is on the wall, climate change is happening, we have to deal with this. And so my supervisor, Lara Skinner, held a several-year process with unions to come up with a kind of climate plan for New York and the ways that we can create these high-quality jobs and also get a lot of clean energy work done. And so these unions became a group called Climate Jobs New York, and they started running campaigns. And one of those campaigns was for the governor to advocate for 9 gigawatts of offshore wind with labor standards attached. And they won. And New York State invested $300 million on offshore wind infrastructure with labor standards. So this was really successful in New York. And so our team decided to run the same process in other states. So it's convening labor unions, conducting interviews, understanding the energy, labor, and environmental landscape of a place, and then developing climate jobs recommendations that can achieve these 3 things: high quality jobs, reducing emissions, and building a diverse and inclusive workforce. And I'll also add adding resilience to different places. And so now we're working in 16 different states across the country, working with labor unions, mostly building trades, but also at times service unions, teachers unions, nurses unions, and helping them develop these kind of climate jobs recommendations. And then they're running campaigns and they're winning. And I'll say in New York, for example, the offshore wind goal that the labor union set was actually higher than the environmental groups' goals that they set. So it's really exciting because we know how labor unions have the ability to rally workers and get things done. And they run a very democratic process. And it's really cool to see that kind of being turned in a different direction where they're advocating for new jobs for many people. And then it's also about bringing new people into the workforce. So people who've traditionally been excluded or who are most affected by climate change. And so a big portion of our work is ways that we can bring new people into this union workforce. So through pre-apprenticeship programs and targeted community hiring and working with community groups and ensuring that these new opportunities are being available and accessible to communities who need these jobs most. And so, that's where we are.
Yeah. It's a multifaceted approach, right? It really is quite collaborative, right? So you have to work, I'm certain you work with other environmental professionals in your day-to-day. So how do you do that? What organizations do you work with to help you achieve those goals?
So when we're writing our climate jobs recommendations, we do interviews with people across the state. So I've interviewed academics, I've interviewed environmental groups, nonprofits, different community groups, as well as labor unions to understand the landscape of a place and what they've seen that works well, what they think should be done better, and gathering a lot of expertise in various different areas. So our recommendations generally span several sectors. So transportation, energy, buildings, resilience adaptation, and then we have general workforce development recommendations. And so we do policy research and we do many interviews, gather as much expertise as we can to determine what could be the best opportunities to achieve these 3 goals of, lower emissions, high quality jobs, and a diverse and inclusive workforce.
I had this wild experience doing this exact same thing that you're talking about in a way in New York. It was basically a transmission line project, right? So it's they were basically taking a power line from a hydroelectric dam in Canada all the way down to New York City.
I know this project.
Yeah. So I worked on the environmental policy part of it.
Okay.
And it's almost it wasn't the first time this was happening, but this is my first window into here's green jobs that are doing things that's completely different than how we were doing it, right? It's just different. And it scared everybody. And we had a public meeting where they literally were like, you're going to dig through our cemeteries to save some fish. And we're like, what are they what? And it turns out, they just were scared. They were afraid of those things happening, but where they were accusing and being angry and coming with all that really, really negative energy. But when we talked to them about what happened, because we find out, okay, they had a coal powered plant, right? That was the main job driver for the community. And then it failed twice. It failed 2 times. And they want us to come back. And they're like, well, we need that power to come back on. We need that to come back. And so that wasn't really what they were saying. What they were saying is we need the jobs. You know what I mean? And so I love that what you're doing is basically, instead of saying, well, you failed twice, so sorry. You're like, is that kind of what you guys do is say, hey, we understand where you're coming from. It's not just jobs. It's not just projects. It's jobs that help these communities that have lost some of those jobs. Is that kind of what you're?
Yeah, that's a good question. So much has been focused in the past on job loss, but we've really focused on job gain. So what are some of the new opportunities that are available? So for example, what are the transferable skills? What are the new areas of opportunity? So for natural gas workers, for example, in New York, there's a real excitement around district heating system and geogrid systems. So these are systems where you can still use natural gas infrastructure, but run hot water through it. And then you can connect homes or buildings to this system with heat pumps. And so it's actually a type of geothermal heating system on a larger scale that natural gas workers can actually maintain their jobs doing this work. So this is like, there's some really interesting, exciting innovations. And so, for example, like the plumbers union was really involved in New York. The plumbers union is like a lot of natural gas workers are part of the UA, the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters. Mm-hmm. And they were really important advocates for legislation in New York for these like district heating systems to get approval for these. So that's like an example. And then sustainable aviation fuel is a huge opportunity for fossil fuel workers, because a lot of the skill sets are very similar in producing sustainable aviation fuel as they are producing petroleum. Like there are refineries for both.
Yeah.
There are a lot of opportunities in, what are some other areas that I've been studying? There's, of course, like building retrofits. Like this is a huge area of opportunity, because think about like the number of buildings that we actually have to decarbonize. We need all types of workers in every single trade. We need people who can replace windows, but people who can also paint roofs to make them cooler. We need people who can install solar panels, but also people who can install new electric power in a home. We need people who can lay down like new utility lines. We need people who can underground utility lines for resilience purposes. Like there's so much work to be done. And that's kind of when I say that sometimes we don't think of the who, the people, like the workers, or the how. Like how is the best way to do this? Like what's the best way to do this transition to make sure that these good jobs are not lost, right? That these same people get to keep their jobs, but they're doing different kinds of work that's helping this transition happen faster, and that their voices are being collectively heard to move policy so that this work can happen faster and sooner and quicker. So does that make sense?
Yeah, heck yeah, that's awesome.
Okay. Maybe I didn't explain that earlier, but it's about like really the new opportunities. And that's what actually gets people excited, is that like knowing that they can, because like people in their own trades know the best way to, like, they want to create the job they're going to go into. Like they're the best, they have the best knowledge of what they're able to do in a new type of industry. So
and the less they have to learn, the sooner they can transition. It makes a ton of sense. It makes almost too much sense, actually. No, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So like in a lot of our climate jobs reports, we make it very concrete. So here's like a recommendation, like you should install this much energy, you should retrofit this many buildings. This is how many new jobs it would create. This is what the emissions reductions would be. And this is how you make it a high quality job. Like these are the labor standards you would apply. Like these are the policy decisions that need to be made. And this is how you would create a high quality job. And this is how you make sure that these jobs are accessible to people in communities who need these jobs most. Yeah.
Which is absolutely brilliant. It makes a ton of sense. You talk about like doing different work with different people, different things. And you've mentioned a few times about, a just workforce and a just system in place. Are there specific initiatives to bring in a more diverse workforce that you could speak to? Like, is there something, have you found that there's certain connection points with communities or certain guidance or guidelines that you could talk to about making sure we do have a diverse workforce?
So a lot of the policy recommendations that we develop are focused on equity and ensuring that these new climate jobs being created are going to the communities that need them most. And so generally after we write these recommendations, these climate jobs coalitions will be formed. Climate Jobs Texas, we have Climate Jobs Texas, Climate Jobs Maine, Rhode Island. And so I can think of an example in Illinois where we supported this. We provided policy research and technical assistance to Climate Jobs Illinois, and they, in collaboration with many environmental justice groups and environmental and community groups, passed CEJA, the Climate and Environmental Justice Act, and which is so far to date one of the landmark climate and equity pieces of legislation out there right now.
It's really interesting and engaging stuff. So yeah. So now it's time for Field Notes. This is the part of the show where we talk to our guests about memorable moments doing their work. We encourage listeners to share those stories with hashtag Field Notes so we can read them on a future episode. So do you have a fun, memorable, or otherwise wow story for us?
I guess like an interesting thing is that I biked across the country once, like from Seattle to DC. And then I took a bus from like DC to New York, and that's how I moved to New York, right? And I did it like a group of people over like 6 weeks. But the funny part of the story is that as soon as like my fourth day in New York City, my bike was like pretty much stolen. Like most of it was like destroyed. Like the wheels were gone, like the handlebars were gone, like all of the like parts were just like destroyed or missing or whatever. And I was so heartbroken. And I kept that, like my bike frame, what was left of it, like under my bed for like 3 years, thinking like, maybe I'll like put it back together. Like I'll be really handy and I'll do that. And then I ended up having to move. So I like, you know, I put it for someone to take, and then I kind of forgot about it. And then I wrote this report in my job about ways that New York can create new climate jobs and like reduce emissions. And we found that, you know, when the pandemic happened, there was a huge increase in bicycling in New York City, but with that was like a huge increase in bike theft. Mm-hmm. And I remembered how I don't bike anymore because of how my bike was stolen and how heartbreaking that was. And I ended up like writing an op-ed about how we need like bike storage in New York City. And then like another like Streets Blog New York picked it up, and they were like, hey, DOT, like, why don't we have enough bike storage? And then like I somehow accidentally became like a bicycle advocate.
Hey. But like, what happened after that? Like, what? So
I know there's like, it's like TBD now. I wish I had like a good resolution to this story right now. I know that DOT is still like working on potentially they did a pilot project where they put out these like, what I'm talking about when I say bike storage is like covered bicycle, like glockable, like storage that can go in free car parking spots. And they did like a pilot project, and then like they kind of stopped. And so right now it's still kind of in limbo. Yeah, that's where we are, I guess.
Yeah.
It's kind of an equity issue. It's really sad how we think so much about like cars, but not as much about bicyclists. And like, especially in like New York City, there's so many people who need their bike for their like livelihoods because they're like delivery people. Yeah. And so it's been kind of difficult in that regard. And plus like people just want to be safe during the pandemic, and they want to stay like social distance. And so they want to bike. And it's just, you know, it's also like a climate thing where it's just better to reduce emissions.
I don't know. So I used to bike all the time too, right? I used to do that a lot. And then I saw someone get hit. Well, I actually saw them reset his leg, actually is what I saw, which is almost worse because I could, you know, you can imagine that was not fun for anybody involved. And I had already had like a couple of like close instances, and I was in Richmond at the time. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I need a new hobby. I need a new one that's less dangerous. But I still feel like I miss it a lot, you know? So I don't know. Do you ever say like, hey, I'm going to get a new bike. This is the year I'm going to do it again? Or
okay, is it over? Now I do have a bike. I just got an electric bike. Well, my dad mailed me one from California that he was no longer using. But it's winter, so I have yet to ride it around. So, but I'm hoping in the spring I'll take it to work. Oh, there is a good part of the story. After I wrote that op-ed, I told my workplace, like I was like, hey, we need like bicycle storage. And then like they actually made bicycle storage for everyone in the building. So,
oh yeah,
I don't know.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
And what was it like to like do cross country? Like, what do you like? That must have taken, I don't know, how long did it take? And it seems like the most exhausting thing to do, way to move. I feel like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, luckily somebody like it was like 12 of us, and there was like somebody with a van who was carrying our like stuff. So that was nice. We didn't have to carry. I've seen people who do that, who carry their stuff like on their bike. But yeah, it was 6 weeks. It was 3,300 miles. So it was like an average of like 83 miles a day, and all different types of terrain. Like, yeah, it was.
You have to cross mountains. How did you?
So I think there's the hardest part was like the Continental Divide, which is like around like Montana, and you're basically going up what feels like a steep, like completely 90-degree incline. And it's like, you're kind of biking at like 4 miles an hour, not sure if you're really moving.
Right.
And then finally you get to the top, and it's just like whizzing all the way down, like 30 miles an hour. Yeah. And you're just like for like miles and miles, and it's fantastic. So yeah, definitely there were like steep mountain ranges, and then Pennsylvania had a lot of like rolling mountain ranges, and then everything in the middle was like pretty flat, which was nice.
How much food did you have to eat?
Yeah, I actually won a pie eating contest because
Come on.
A lot of food. Yeah. I would eat like entire pizzas, like, like big pizzas by myself. It was a lot of energy you need for that kind of thing. Yeah.
I need to start biking so I can eat whole pizzas like I used
There you
to.
go. Oh, that's hilarious.
I've always wanted to like walk, the whole like, what's the guy's name? I wanted to walk across the country because I don't want to bike. I'm afraid of being on a bike on the road with cars, but like I would love to ride a horse or just walk across the country.
Yeah. I've heard there's a really nice like Appalachian trail walk.
Oh yeah, that's north-south. Yeah, from like Alabama to Maine, I think.
So I found out like the last like 3 days or 3 days before the bike ride was supposed to be over that somebody died doing the same thing, like the same ride, like a few years before, like somebody had turned a corner and got hit by a truck. And I was like, great, cool. Thanks for not telling me that earlier. I may not have done this at all.
Right.
Yeah. I was at an age where you kind of like think nothing can happen to you and like you're invincible and so I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's true, right? Nothing can happen to you guys. Is that?
Yeah. So
yeah, that's very cool. That's a very cool story.
Yeah, I think like the micromobility is so cool because it's just like it's such a different way to experience the world. Like you feel the wind on your face, like you feel like like the inclines and the declines, and it's just like you're more with the planet.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I watched.
I love it.
Attempted documentary by a family that was attempting to do it on bikes with their like 3 to 5 kids. I can't remember. It seemed like a lot of kids and a dog, and they made it like a week.
It's hard.
Make it very far. So it was like the documentary was all, oh, we're doing it, blah, blah, blah. And then it was like, okay, well, it rained, so we had to get a hotel last night or whatever happened. And then it was like, okay, now we're fast forward a week. And then, okay, we're done. And you're like, okay, you drove the whole second half. I know you did.
Well, it's challenging. Like you do like the Appalachian Trail, right? It's supposed to be a 4-month hike, and you cannot do that if you don't know how to hike that long. And some people are like, I go hikes all the time. Yeah, you go for like an hour. That's not the same thing as going on a hike for months. And
well, some would say that you're training as you're doing it.
Yes, which is also scary.
Yeah, for sure. When it's that high stakes, yeah.
People drop out of it.
Yeah, that's true. You always have the option to not do it, not finish. But yeah. Man, did you do prep for it? Did you learn by, when you say some people say that, are you the some people?
I'm one of those people. No, I decided the week before it started, and I was the one who was like the last person to get to like the site every time. And I was the one who trained while I was doing it. Yeah, that is, it's real. That is coming from the heart.
Oh, that's awesome. I was like, wait a minute. She said that in a way that I need to ask a follow-up. That's awesome. But yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a really cool thing.
There is one thing I'm dying to ask you before we start wrapping things up, because I know I can always use help with this, but do you have suggestions and tips on practicing mindfulness? Because I think this is something that you do, right?
Yeah, so I'm actually doing a teacher training course through UCLA on mindfulness. I got into this kind of on accident, just like kind of, taking a past class. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting, and then realizing that it had just so many benefits for me in terms of focus, concentration, but also empathy. And I realized there's just so much value to taking the time to stop and be in the present moment. And over time, my practice has deepened, and I've just kind of combining this with with the environmental work that we do. I just noticed that in myself and in others, like there's so much emotion about this work. There's so much frustration and anger and resentment and fear. There's a lot of like these emotions that are kind of brewing. And sometimes our work can kind of come from that place, but it can also come from a different place. It can come from a place of love and kindness and empathy. And I think that mindfulness is also really beneficial because it can kind of bring awareness to all of these feelings and let them all be there, but allow you to kind of take the time to take the right action from the right place, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Is it just meditation, or are there other approaches to mindfulness that you incorporate? So
I would like to say that mindfulness the practice is actually real life. there's the part where you're on the cushion, but like the practice is actually in real life when you're in real situations where you can be reactive and you can be angry and you can do what you've always done. And those are the times of actual practice when you stop and you come back to your body, you pay attention to your breath, and you just make some space, and you can see things a little bit more clearly. And I think it's made me a better researcher because, when you're not automatically trying to justify your existing perceptions about the world and you take some time to see things clearly, it can open up a lot of new avenues and a lot of just new perspectives. I've also just found it good for relating with people too and understanding different perspectives. And, there's the natural gas worker who is completely and understandably concerned about losing their job and losing their pension and feeling frustrated because, why are these people not thinking about me and about my future? And then there are the environmentalists who are thinking, what is my future if we don't deal with this crisis? And so there's so many feelings, there's so many people. And I think, definitely this practice has really helped deepen my empathy and care and being able to hold all of these people in my heart and work from that place.
Yeah. And I would say too, it's absolutely essential, right? I mean, you mentioned it. Everybody can approach the same thing with fear. And if you don't, then they don't have to be afraid either. I think that's fantastic.
That is. And I'll try to be more mindful as I go through my day. We are running out of time. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we let you go?
Yeah. Okay. So what I will say is that this work is so important and it's definitely expanding, and it's really important to have more professionals at this intersection of climate and labor because this field is just rapidly growing. This need to help labor unions incorporate climate language into their collective bargaining, that's extremely important. And making sure that there's language to protect workers if there's an extreme event, and if it's too hot outside, making sure that they're getting paid, that they have water breaks. So there's so many aspects of this that are growing. There's the work to organize, and there's work in my field too with helping labor unions and just workers in general mobilize around climate change. So helping them kind of understand the role that they play and the power that they have to actually influence their workplace and the power that they have to actually influence change. So for example, New York labor unions were very strong actors behind making the city divest the pension system from fossil fuels. And that was a huge win. And this is a pension system for thousands and thousands of workers. And so there are so many ways that workers can make real substantial climate change. And there's a real need for experts and researchers and workers and just everyone to know that they have this power and ability to make this kind of change. So there are tons of opportunities. There are opportunities at Cornell. There are opportunities within the labor unions. And so I think that this field of climate and labor is definitely growing rapidly.
Oh yeah, 100%.
That's really awesome. And listen, people, she is talking about jobs and connections to jobs. So I'm sure there are some people who may want to get in touch with you. And so, Anita, how would you recommend they do that?
People can definitely get in touch with me on LinkedIn. Anita, Anita Raman, Raman.
Awesome. This was great. Thank you so much for joining us today, and good luck on your future projects. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you so much.
And that's our show. Thank you, Anita, for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. See you, everybody.
Bye.